Okay, so we're going to make this really pretty little Labradorite necklace today with a lovely fairy. Now with this kind of a pattern, it's sort of uniform in that it's the same on both sides, but it's rather irregular in its patterning. So what I like to do for this kind of a pattern is to start off by figuring out my pattern on a bead board. So you can see here I've picked out a few moonstones, some Labradorite, a couple of seed beads, and all the way around, and then repeat. So this is going to make it super easy to just string it up now. And I'm going to use my favorite stringing material, this great AccuFlex. This is a 0.019 diameter, and also the 49 strand. That's my favorite. It's most flexible. And I usually work right off of the spool because then I don't waste a single inch. I don't cut a piece in advance. Just go ahead and work off the spool. So I'm going to be taking the beads right off my bead board and string them right onto my wire as soon as I can find the hole. There we go. Now this is going to take a little while because I got a lot of beads here and I got to find a lot of little bead holes. Also, you'll find out that with some of our finer, nicer beads like these moonstones, the holes can be kind of small. So sometimes we have to find the right bead. And sometimes the holes are drilled from both ends, and though your wire may not go through one side, if you just turn the bead over, it will go through the hole on the other side. Very strange thing. So I've got these things perfectly laid out on my bead board. That's the nice thing. We have lots of different bead boards and different sizes for different lengths of strands. They're also marked out with measurements. And they've got little wells inside of them to hold your extra beads. The nice thing is, I'm not as likely to mess up because I've got them laid out on my bead board in order. Let's see, 3 moonstones and 1 seed bead. Is that right? Nope, it's only supposed to be 2 moonstones and 1 seed bead. Keep an eye on your pattern as you go along. It's much easier to correct a mistake early rather than having to unstring the whole thing and fix it. Okay, so I'm going to just keep following this pattern on this bead board. And you don't need to stay and watch all of this. You could do the exact same thing yourself, or you can freeform it. Make it the way you like, your inspiration. And when I get closer down to the end, I will show you, well, I will go ahead and put the fairy on because that's just stringing it on along with everything else. And then I'll show you how to put that wire wrap briolette on the bottom of the fairy. So join me in a few minutes and I'll have this thing ready for you to watch. Okay, so we've gone along this far onto my string. I'm going to finish up this stringing and show how we finish the back of the necklace. Just a few more beads to go on. And you can see I've also added the fairy right there in the middle. She has a little hidden bail on the back, so she just strings on just like any other bead. Okay, so here we are. We've strung the entire thing that we had out there on the bead board. This is not quite long enough for a necklace. So I'm going to add a little chain on the back. So let's finish this little bit first by adding a crimp bead. There are these little tiny sterling silver tubes. I like the sterling silver because it's more malleable than the plated ones, and they're not that expensive. So I use the sterling silver on those. And most of this necklace also is pretty high quality beads, so I'm going to use sterling. Then I've got an AccuGuard. This is like a little horseshoe shaped tube. I'm going to thread my wire through there. Then I'm going to go back through the other half of the horseshoe. And then I'm going to go through the crimp tube and pull that all tight. So here I have my AccuGuard, my crimp tube, and my wires going through on both sides. Now it's kind of important when you're crimping, if you can, to try and get those wires side by side rather than crossing each other. It'll hold your crimp better. And then I'm going to use the great crimping pliers. The crimping pliers have different notches. The notch that's closest to the handle is where you start. And when I put that crimp tube in that notch, and give a squeeze. It forms sort of a smile shape out of that crimp tube. Then I'm going to turn it sort of sideways. I'm going to use the notch closest to the tip and fold that little smile in half. And that holds your AccuFlex very securely. Now, ordinarily, I would then feed these beads over this little bit of a tail, but these beads have very small holes. So I'm going to cut that tail off right at the tip. So we cut off the tail. I don't normally do this. More secure if you can leave it, but not with these beads. There we go. Cut that off. Slide all those beads down. And we'll crimp the other end. Now I can cut off my AccuFlex, leave myself a couple of inches to work with. Okay, and I'll do the exact same thing. Don't want to crimp too tight because that makes your beads go kind of wonky. Put on a crimp bead. Put on an AccuGuard. I love these AccuGuards. AccuFlex is a very, very tough stainless steel cable with a nylon coating, but even so, the kind of wear and tear it can get on the end of a necklace can be pretty severe. So this little AccuGuard is just a little bit more protection for your AccuFlex. And it'll make your necklaces last longer, less likely to snap or break in any way. Very cool. And again, I would normally tuck that tail down into the beads here, but I know my bead holes are small and it's not going to fit. So I'm just going to pull that tight. I don't want any gaps in my wire, but I also don't want it so tight that the beads kind of scrunch up against each other. So it's tight with no gaps, but not straining against the lesion. I get that by adding a little bit of curve to this, because if it's perfectly straight, then I can make it even tighter. I don't want it that tight. I want it to drape around a person's neck nicely. So I'll make it that tight and no tighter. Try and make sure my AccuFlex is side by side rather than crossing each other. And crimping near the handle to make a smile shape. Turn it sideways, crimp it at the tip to fold that smile in half. Check it. Beautiful. Nip off that extra little bit of AccuFlex. Okay, so here we almost have a necklace. It's still just a little bit short, so I'm going to add a very short length of chain on either side. And this also puts chain at the back of my neck. I like chain at the back of my neck instead of beads. Sometimes beads, especially bicones, can be pokey on your neck. And sometimes they can wrap around the hairs on the back of your neck. A nice chain like this feels good. So I'm going to take a jump ring. Oh wait, before I do that, let's get our other piece of chain so we can have two pieces that are the same length. I need two pieces of chain that are the same length. Now sometimes I can be really crazy and just count those lengths, but sometimes I can just eyeball it and cut it. There we go. There we go. This is sterling silver chain. So I'm going to save those scraps like that because I can use them, melt them down, and do other projects with that. Put that aside. Okay, so let's just add the chain onto the end of that necklace. Opening a jump ring, which I'm sure you've heard the instructions on opening a jump ring many times. Twist them open, twist them closed. Don't try and pull them apart. Always with a twisting motion. These are a kind of a thin jump ring, so I'm going to double jump ring these. Just for extra security. There we go. And we'll add our clasp while we're at it, since we're jump ringing our little hearts out. And I'm going to do this little cute little toggle clasp, little heart. It'll go sweetly with the fairy. Make sure you get that thing closed. Sometimes a wiggle back and forth is a good thing. Not only does it help you make sure you get that jump ring totally closed, but it also hardens the wire a little bit and makes it less likely to open up on you again. And the other end of the clasp. There we go. So we have a completed necklace, but you'll note that that little fairy doesn't want to hang right. It needs a little weight on the bottom. So we're going to do a briolette on the bottom, just a little dangle to help it for its weight and also to be prettier. And what I'll do is I'm going to work right off of this sterling silver wire. This is a 24 gauge, yes, 24 gauge sterling silver wire. And I have picked out one of these Labradorite briolettes that has a big enough hole. Again, when you're working with the nice stones like these, quite often the hole will be very small. So you might have to pick and choose the right one for you. Okay, so I'm going to make a loop on this. So I'm going to give myself ample wire, but not too much wire. Sterling silver is expensive. So I'll put that in there and I'll just fold that up like that. Now I'll decide where I want my loop to be. And where it crosses right there, that's where I want a loop. So I'm just going to make a little bend there. Just using my fingers. This is only 24 gauge, it's easy enough. I'm going to hold on to that while I wrap this around. Now we can use tools. I find with this particular wire, it's actually easier for me to just use my fingers. My fingers and my fingernails. And when it gets a little too short and I want to get a little tighter, I'll come in with my tools and finish this little wrap. Wrapping around with that chain nose, bent chain nose pliers, my favorite. There we go. So there we have a little wrap. And I'm going to trim off that excess little piece of wire. Like I always say, I'm a little Scotch, as my mother used to say actually. I'm going to save that little piece of silver wire for a later date. Okay, now I also want to put a bead on here. So now is the time when I'm going to cut off my excess wire. I want to leave enough to make another wrap loop, so that should be enough. And what have I got there? 1.5 inches, 2 inches? Okay, little seed bead. A moonstone. And another seed bead. And now I'm going to make another wrap loop up here. So I'll use my pliers. I'm going to make a 90-degree bend. You see that stem there between the pliers and that seed bead? That's the room I have for wraps. I want to have the same number of wraps up above as I had below for a nice professional look. So that looks like about the right length. I'm going to make a little bend right there, like a 90-degree bend. Then I'm going to take my round nose pliers. I'm going to wrap that tail of that wire up over the top jaw until it's pointing down. Take the pliers out. Reposition with the lower jaw in the loop. Push that wire all the way around to the other side. And now this time, using my bent chain nose, I will wrap around that stem I showed earlier. And it should take about 3 wraps. There we go, to cover up that stem. And that little tiny scrap, I'll nip it off. And I straighten all this up so that it looks beautiful. I want my loop to be parallel to my Labradorite, so I'm going to twist it a little bit so that it's all parallel. Now that goes on to the bottom of my pendant here. And I'm going to use a couple of jump rings to do that with. And because I use double jump rings everywhere else, I will use a double jump ring here too. I don't think we need the extra strength in this case because it's not that much weight being put on that jump ring. But just for consistency, for that nice professional look. And there you have it. Hope you enjoyed this project. We're going to have some more Labradorite projects, I understand. And also lots and lots of wonderful projects at firemountaingems.com. Thanks for joining me. Happy beading.